as mad as it felt, you know, I wrote a will, and the doctor came in and said, "Have you heard of a pacemaker?" I said, "I have. Why?" And he just said, "Something's not right with the bottom part of your heart." What would happen is you'd feel him sort of go in to my chest here, and I'd be like watching him. It was probably about end of November. I started feeling like just a bit rough, like couldn't put my finger on it. Was quite lethargic and stuff, struggling to get out of bed. Luckily, I'd gone round to my mum's to stay there because the electric had gone in my house at night. So I was like, "Oh, I'll come and stay there tonight." And then I woke up on the Wednesday morning, which was the 11th of December. And I remember looking at my hands, and my hands were blue, like, and my arms were like a grey colour. And I was freezing cold, and I was struggling to sit up in bed. And I knew then, you know, something was seriously wrong. My mum has, you know, a little blood pressure monitor at home. So I put that around my arm, and I took my blood pressure, my pulse, and my blood pressure was pretty low. It was like 88/50, which is, you know, it's pretty low. But my pulse said 32. So I was like, that can't be right. So I started like feeling for a pulse in my neck, and I couldn't find it. I did it again, it said 34, and then I did it again, it said 31. So I was like, "Oh, okay, something's not right here." As I did that, my mum came through the door, and she sort of gasped. She sort of went like that, and she said, "What's wrong?" I was like, "Mum, I don't know." And she said, "Max, you blew." Oh. And so she said, I need to ring the doctor. So I messaged my friend, who's also like my private doctor, told him what the situation was, and he said, "You need to get to A&E immediately." Can't describe it. I in my doctor's notes, it said I couldn't move my arms, so I was struggling to like lift my arms up. And the worst feeling was I felt like my throat was closing up. That's what it felt like. It felt like someone had hands around my neck. He said, "You need to go to A&E immediately." So we went down there. They took my pulse at the door at A&E, and they literally put me in a wheelchair, and I was straight into the heart unit, and I was put on, all wired up, and within an hour they asked me if I'd ever heard of a pacemaker, and I was just like, "I have, yeah," because my granddad had a defibrillator years ago. So I kind of knew a little bit about that, but not so much a pacemaker. But yeah, that was from being fine to hearing that "Have you heard of a pacemaker?" was a bit of a shock. The first time the doctor came in and said, "Have you heard of a pacemaker?" I said, "I have. Why?" And he just said, "There's something's not right with the bottom part of your heart. For some reason, your rhythm is way off, and the signal doesn't seem to be getting from the top chamber of your heart to the bottom." The worry is that you get a buildup of blood around in or around the heart. The first night was pretty scary, because obviously all sorts is going on in your head, and it's something that's you never thought would happen. You know, certainly not now. Worst case scenario, like something goes wrong, because obviously 2 weeks before this, I had no idea that I was ill, or I was training. I was in America. I ran up the Rocky Steps in Philadelphia. Like, I was doing everything physical I could possibly do. The first night, I was awake all night, and it was just that same feeling. It was that, you know, the sort of closing in my throat, like really struggling to move, really deep, slow breaths, like, and that continued for 10 days. I spoke to a doctor that said, you know, you could, because I'm young in the sense of having a heart issue, I could have lived maybe a few weeks, maybe a few months, but It could have been a few hours. We don't know. That's the problem. I could have lived like that potentially for a few weeks or months, but only being in the state that I was in, I would have had to have been sort of bed bound, and you can't walk. You need a BPM of around 70 to be able to like go for a walk. As mad as it felt, I wrote a will, because I mean, if I could go from being absolutely, on top of the world to then being told the bottom part of your heart isn't working, in my head it was like, well, what if the top half stops working overnight? When you get told that, you really realise what your responsibilities are. I've got a partner, I've got a family, I've got 2 little nephews, and all of that stuff really comes to the front of it all. The first night I was on a ward. So I was like behind a little curtain. It was only a small ward. There was probably like 6 or 7 of us. It's mad what you write though in a time like that, and the detail, like down to my football shirts, who I was going to give them to. Do you know what I mean? It's just like the weirdest stuff. The first night was Wednesday. Friday was the worst day that I had there because my heart rate dropped. It dropped to 26. And my blood pressure dropped at the same time, and that was the biggest worry if my heart rate dropped and my blood pressure dropped. So, and because it was a Friday night, the consultants aren't there on hand to do the operation if need be as an emergency. It was quite close that night, and that night was when my heart rate dropped, I could feel it. So it really felt like my neck was closing up, and I could almost feel it closing, and that's when the sort of panic really kicked in. It happened again 2 days later when I went for my CT scan, because when your heart rate's so low, it's so difficult to stay warm, and I was in this scanning machine, and it's like a tube. I actually said it was like it was sort of like a bush tucker trial type thing. They put you in this tube with the loudest noises, and they strap your chest down with this like weighted plate, and then strap your head down as well, and it's about 1 inch away from your face, and it's just making all these noises, but it was cold as well. So, and it was 1.5 hours long that I was in there. So by the time I came out, I couldn't move, and I looked like, have you ever seen E.T.?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know when E.T.'s lying in the river? That's what I look like.
No.
Honestly, right, because I could see myself in the reflection of the machine, and I was lying on the floor, and the guy comes out and he goes, right, Max, can you sit up? And I was like, mate, I can't. But my whole arms were blue, and then my nurse from the hospital came in because I had to be transferred by ambulance to have the CT scan done. And she came in and was like, what have you done to him? And the poor guys were like, I haven't done anything. And it was just that because it was quite cold in there and my heart rate was so low. So again, my heart rate, when I came out of there, they fixed me back up on the stretcher, and it had dropped down to 26 again. So again, and then it was like, right, I've got to travel sort of 45 minutes in the ambulance now to get back to the comfort of being in my room at the hospital and, surrounded by the doctors and stuff. So that was the other time that was like probably the worst, because I was so cold, and because I didn't have like everything around me that I had in my room, like all my blankets, and my mum brought me in an electric blanket and little hand warmers, like that was really tough, because I couldn't move my hands and stuff. The surgery was pretty mental, actually. It was a really odd experience. The main problem that they had was when they opened me up and were trying to put the leads in, a lot of my veins had collapsed, because my heart rate was so low, and I was so dehydrated all the time. I can feel something going on, but not much. And then they've got this like sheet over you with a window here. So I'm looking at the surgeon, like, and he'd be putting it in, and then you'd see him sort of go, And then I'd be like, everything all right, doc? And he'd be like, yeah, it's all fine, it's all fine. I know this sounds grim, but so what would happen is you'd feel him sort of go in to my chest here, and I'd be like watching him, and I'd look up at him like that, and as he sort of pulled his hands away, obviously his gloves would just be sort of covered in blood, like, and that I remember thinking, oh my god. Then they got leads in, but then they have to get a signal from the technician who has an iPad and says, right, the pacemaker is working. It's got the signals going to my heart. And he'd ask the lady with the iPad, and she'd say, no signal. So I think at that point, about 2 hours in, that's when I first started thinking, right, what's going to happen now? Because obviously, how many veins have I got that you can use, and why is there no signal? But eventually, they got it done, and I remember being wheeled out, and the first face I saw was my dad, because he had the door open for my room, and I remember him just leaning over and saying, "Someone's here to see you," and the first face I saw was Maisie's, and that, I remember that being really nice. Like, that was the first time I'd actually felt like a real, and I had a proper heartbeat by then as well. So my heart rate started just shooting up. So I remember like feeling my feet like going all like tingly, because I think obviously like the blood started proper pumping around. I was like, holy shit, like I feel alive again. I remember being wheeled in and I saw Maze, and I remember feeling like, like butterflies for the first time, and like my heart rate. And then I looked up, my heart rate was 85. It was hard being away from her, but I think at that time, because I was almost so numb to everything, because I really wasn't myself. I didn't have the normal feelings that I have, because like emotionally and physically I was kind of shut off. It was just like normal when we saw her. It was just like she just sort of climbed on the bed, obviously lay on this side, put her head on me, and we just had a cuddle for a couple of hours and talked about her show, and I talked about how pissed off I was that City had lost to United, and it was just normal. Yeah, we just treated it like any other time we've not seen each other for a while.